Commander Zilch adjusted his ceremonial conquest cape for the third time, admiring his reflection in the polished surface of his command console. Today was the day he would finally earn his promotion to Supreme Overlord of minor planetary acquisitions. Earth would be his masterpiece, his ticket to the big leagues of galactic domination. "B!" he barked at his communications officer, a nervous creature who looked like someone had crossed a ferret with a telephone switchboard. "Initiate the standard surrender or die protocol. Make it sound extra threatening this time." Israel's Beep's 6 eyes darted between various blinking panels, his whiskers twitching with anxiety. "Right away, Commander. Opening channel to Earth's primary governmental facility now." What Beep didn't mention was that he'd been up all night playing zero-gi poker and hadn't exactly been paying attention when he input the coordinates. Instead of reaching the United Nations in New York, his transmission bounced off 3 satellites, ricocheted through a fiber-optic cable, and landed squarely in the customer service line of Martinez Pest Solutions in Queens. Frank Martinez was having a perfectly normal Tuesday morning, which meant he was elbow-deep in someone's roach problem and questioning his life choices. When his phone rang with that weird, staticky sound that meant either a bad connection or his ex-wife calling from her new place in Arizona, he almost didn't answer. "Martinez Pest Solutions, we kill it so you don't have to," he answered, balancing the phone between his shoulder and ear while screwing the cap back on his spray bottle. The voice that came through was pompous, overdramatic, and had the kind of accent that sounded like someone gargling marbles while trying to speak English through a broken translator app. "Primitive beings of the third planet, I am Commander Zilch of the Galactic Superiority Fleet. You will surrender your pathetic world immediately, or face total annihilation." Frank paused, looked at his phone, and then put it back to his ear. "Okay, buddy, I'm gonna stop you right there. First of all, it's Tuesday morning, and I haven't had my coffee yet, so the dramatic voice thing isn't really landing. Second, if this is about the Henderson job, I told them it would take 3 treatments to get rid of those termites." There was silence on the other end, followed by what sounded like frantic whispering in a language that reminded Frank of his cousin's Chihuahua having an argument with a garbage disposal. Commander Zilch was confused. He'd conquered 14 worlds, and none of them had ever responded to his ultimatum by mentioning coffee or someone named Henderson. He looked at Beep, who was now frantically checking and rechecking his coordinates. Did he just dismiss our demand for surrender?" Zilch whispered. "I think he's playing psychological warfare, sir," Beep whispered back, though his confidence was roughly equivalent to a wet napkin's structural integrity. Frank, meanwhile, was warming up to what he assumed was an elaborate prank call. Probably his brother Eddie, who never met a conspiracy theory he didn't want to marry and have little paranoid babies with. "Look, Eddie, I know this is you, and the alien voice thing is actually pretty good, but I've got a real job to do here. Mrs. Chen has ants in her kitchen that could probably form their own labor union at this point." "I am not this Eddie person," Zilch sputtered, his cape now thoroughly wrinkled from stress. "I command the most feared armada in 3 galactic sectors." "Armada, huh?" Frank grinned, deciding to play along. "Well, Commander Zigzag." "Zilch." "Right, Zilch. Here's the thing about infestations, Commander. It doesn't matter how big your fleet is, or how scary you think you are. I've been in this business for 15 years, and I've never met a pest I couldn't handle. You want to bring your little bug problem to Queens? Be my guest. I'll give you the friends and family discount." Frank rattled off his business address and hung up, chuckling to himself. Eddie was really going all out with this one. He'd have to remember to mess with him back next time they had Sunday dinner at Mom. On the other end of the galaxy, Commander Zilch stared at his communication device in stunned silence. The human had not only refused to surrender, but had invited them to bring their fleet to a specific location and promised to handle them personally. "Sir," Beep said quietly, "I think we may have underestimated this species." "Clearly," Zilch replied, straightening his cape with newfound respect for these cunning Earth warriors. Set course for the coordinates he provided, and Beep— "Yes, Commander?" "Prepare the invasion force. We're dealing with a much more sophisticated enemy than our intelligence suggested." Back on his ship, Commander Zilch paced the bridge with the intensity of someone who'd just discovered their enemy knew exactly what they were doing. Every phrase from the human conversation played through his mind like a tactical manual written in code. "The human mentioned multiple ongoing operations," he announced to his bewildered crew. "Henderson job, termite treatments, something about ants forming labor unions. These aren't random words, people. This is clearly their military structure." Lieutenant Wurr, whose main qualification was looking impressive in uniform despite having the tactical awareness of soggy toast, nodded sagely. "Of course, sir. And when he mentioned giving us the friends and family discount, he was obviously indicating they have rates for different threat levels. Exactly! Zilch snapped his fingers, which made a sound like bubble wrap being stepped on by a tap dancer. We're not dealing with primitives. We're dealing with professionals. Meanwhile, back in Queens, Frank was dealing with his own version of assembling a crew, though his definition of elite forces was somewhat different. Eddie Martinez burst through the shop door like a one-man parade of paranoia, his eyes darting everywhere except at the person he was talking to. Frank, you're not going to believe this, but I just intercepted some seriously weird radio chatter. Someone's talking about invasion forces and galactic fleets, and I swear to God, it's happening. Yeah, Eddie, I know. You called me pretending to be an alien commander about an hour ago. Nice touch with the accent, by the way. Eddie grabbed Frank by the shoulders, which was impressive considering Eddie was roughly the size and build of a worried pretzel. Frank, I didn't call you. I was busy installing my new satellite dish array to monitor government frequencies. This is it, man. This is the big one. They're coming and somehow you're involved. Before Frank could explain that Eddie's grip on reality was about as firm as his grip on personal hygiene, the shop door chimed again. Ruth Kim walked in, carrying a briefcase that looked like it could survive nuclear war and still maintain proper filing system organization. Frank Martinez? She asked, consulting a tablet that probably cost more than Frank's truck. I'm Ruth Kim from Galactic Accounting Solutions. I understand you've recently acquired an extraterrestrial client base and need someone to handle the financial implications of interspecies commerce. Frank blinked. I'm sorry, what now? Your alien contact uploaded your conversation to 17 different galactic trading networks. The economic potential is staggering, but you're going to need proper documentation for interstellar tax purposes. Ruth adjusted her glasses with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. I specialize in non-terrestrial revenue streams. This is insane, Frank muttered, but before he could process the full implications of having an accountant who apparently took alien clients seriously, the door chimed a third time. Jenny Walsh bounced in like someone had replaced her morning coffee with liquid enthusiasm and a double shot of social media addiction. Oh my God, you guys, Frank Martinez, right? I'm Jenny, from the university's Xenocommunication program. Professor Thompson sent me because apparently you're the first human to successfully negotiate with an alien species, and I am here for it. She whipped out her phone and started recording immediately. This is Jenny Walsh reporting live from Ground Zero of First Contact, where one local exterminator just revolutionized human-alien relations. Frank looked around his pest control shop, which now contained his conspiracy theorist brother, an accountant who specialized in alien tax law, and a college student live-streaming what she apparently thought was the most important moment in human history. Okay, he said slowly. Either I'm having the world's most elaborate nervous breakdown or Eddie's paranoia is actually contagious. Neither, Ruth said, pulling up something on her tablet. According to galactic communication logs, you received a formal military ultimatum approximately 73 minutes ago from Commander Zilch of the Galactic Superiority Fleet. Your response has been classified as a counter-ultimatum, and frankly the interest in your negotiation strategies is already generating significant market buzz. Eddie was now pressed against the window, his face leaving probably permanent fog marks on the glass. Guys, I hate to interrupt this beautiful moment of my vindication, but there's a really big shadow moving across the sky, and it's not shaped like any aircraft I've ever seen. Jenny immediately spun around, phone still recording. Are you telling me they're actually coming here? To this actual address? Frank walked over to the window and looked up. Sure enough, something that looked like a chrome-plated city block was slowly descending through the clouds, heading directly for the strip mall parking lot. Well, he said, with the tone of someone who'd just realized his Tuesday was about to get significantly weirder. I guess we're about to find out if this is still a prank call. The alien ship landed in the parking lot with all the grace of a chrome whale trying to parallel park. It took out 2 lampposts, a shopping cart, and what remained of the faded yellow lines that had been optimistically painted sometime during the Clinton administration. Frank watched through his window as a ramp extended from the ship, with a mechanical whirring sound that suggested the aliens had the same relationship with maintenance that most humans had with flossing. Well, they're definitely committed to the bit. Commander Zilch emerged first, his ceremonial cape now somehow even more wrinkled despite the brief journey. Behind him came Beep, clutching a device that looked like someone had crossed a tablet with a panic attack, and Lieutenant Whir, who was trying to look intimidating, but mostly succeeded in looking confused. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, Jenny whispered, her phone capturing every moment. This is actually happening. I'm getting like 10,000 views already. Eddie had moved from the window to what he apparently considered a strategic position behind the cash register. I knew it. I told everyone at the diner, but did they listen? No. Eddie's just paranoid, they said. Eddie needs to take his medication, they said. Well, who's laughing now? Still them, probably, Frank muttered, but he straightened his Martinez Pest Solutions polo shirt and headed for the door. All right, people. Showtime. Let's see what Commander Zigzag wants. It's Zilch, came a muffled shout from outside. He's got good hearing, Ruth observed, making a note on her tablet. That could be relevant for contract negotiations. Frank opened the door and stepped outside, immediately regretting not bringing sunglasses, because apparently alien ships came with the Hollywood Spotlight package. Commander Zilch approached with the kind of swagger that suggested he'd practiced this entrance in the mirror. Human Martinez, Zilch declared, his voice carrying across the parking lot like a poorly tuned opera singer. I have come to accept your challenge. Challenge? Frank looked around the strip mall parking lot, which also housed a nail salon, a place that claimed to sell authentic Chinese food but was run by Dave from New Jersey, and a store that exclusively sold phone cases. Buddy, the only challenge here is trying to figure out why you landed a spaceship next to the dumpster instead of, the White House. Zilch's expression shifted from confident to confused to concerned, cycling through emotions like a broken slot machine. This is not your command center? My command center is a folding table in the back room where I keep the invoice book, Frank replied. This is just where I store the bug spray. Beef stepped forward, his whiskers twitching frantically as he consulted his device. Commander, perhaps their military structure is more decentralized than we assumed. He could be a field operative. A field operative, Eddie repeated from behind the door, which he'd opened just a crack. That's exactly what they'd call someone in pest control. Frank, they know our operational structure better than we do. Jenny had now moved outside and was providing live commentary to her phone. So, we have the alien commander, who clearly didn't expect to find a strip mall, and the human negotiator, who seems to be treating this like a service call. The tension here is incredible. Ruth appeared at Frank's elbow with her tablet. Commander Zilch, I've taken the liberty of preparing a preliminary services agreement. Standard rates for extraterrestrial pest removal are considerably higher than our terrestrial packages, as I'm sure you understand. Zilch stared at Ruth, then at her tablet, then back at Ruth. Pest removal? Well, that's what you called about, Frank said reasonably. You said you had an infestation problem and needed someone to handle it. I'm assuming you're talking about space termites, or maybe cosmic cockroaches. I've never dealt with the galactic stuff, but bugs are bugs, right? We are not bugs, Lieutenant Wirr sputtered, which was impressive considering he didn't seem to have a mouth in the traditional sense. No, you're the customers, Frank clarified patiently. The bugs are whatever you need me to get rid of, though I have to say, your species has really good English for clients. Most of my calls involve a lot of pointing and gesturing. Commander Zilch felt something in his brain that he was pretty sure wasn't supposed to make that clicking sound. Human Martinez, I believe there has been a significant misunderstanding. Yeah, I'm starting to get that feeling too, Frank agreed. When you said galactic fleet, I thought you meant like a bunch of trucks or something. This is definitely more spaceship than I was expecting. Jenny's live stream was now up to 50,000 viewers, most of whom were trying to figure out if this was the world's most elaborate reality show or if aliens really did conduct first contact negotiations in strip mall parking lots. Wait, Eddie called out, now fully emerging from behind the door. Frank, what if they're not here for pest control? What if they're the pests? The silence that followed was the kind of silence that happens when everyone suddenly realizes they've been having completely different conversations for the past 10 minutes. Beef broke first. Oh no. No. What? Zilch demanded. Sir, I think I may have dialed the wrong planet. Beep, you assured me you had the correct coordinates for Earth's military command. I did have Earth's coordinates, sir, but I think I may have gotten the military command part wrong. Frank looked at the aliens, looked at his pest control shop, looked at Eddie, who was now grinning like Christmas had come early, and slowly started to laugh. Let me get this straight, he said, wiping his eyes. You guys are actual aliens, with an actual spaceship, and you came here because you thought I was in charge of Earth's military? The evidence suggested you were a high-ranking strategic operative, Zilch said defensively. Buddy, I spray cockroaches for a living. The most strategic thing I do is figure out whether to use the gel bait or the powder. Jenny's phone was practically smoking from the number of comments flooding in. Ruth was frantically taking notes. Eddie looked like he'd just won the paranoia lottery. And somewhere in the back of everyone's mind, the same thought was forming. This was either going to be the best thing that ever happened to them, or the last thing that ever happened to anyone. "So," Frank said finally, "now what?" The answer to Frank's question came in the form of 17 black SUVs, 2 news helicopters, and what appeared to be every government official within a 100-mile radius who owned a suit and a clipboard. They descended on the strip mall like a particularly aggressive swarm of bureaucrats, transforming the parking lot into something that looked like a crossover episode between The X-Files and a budget committee meeting. Agent Morrison emerged from the lead SUV with the kind of purposeful stride that suggested he'd practiced walking importantly in front of a mirror. His earpiece crackled with official-sounding nonsense as he approached the group, his eyes taking in the alien ship, Frank's pest control uniform, and Jenny's still-streaming phone with equal measures of confusion and irritation. "Mr. Martinez," Morrison announced, flashing a badge that probably had more security clearances than most small countries. "I'm Agent Morrison with the Department of Extraterrestrial Affairs. We're going to need you to step away from the alien visitors while we handle this situation." Frank looked at the badge, looked at Agent Morrison's serious expression, and then looked back at Commander Zilch, who had started backing toward his ship with the cautious movements of someone who'd just realized they'd accidentally wandered into someone else's family drama. "Hold up there, Agent Smith," Frank said, which made Morrison's eye twitch slightly. "But I think you've got this backwards. They came to me. We were having a perfectly reasonable conversation about pest control rates before you showed up with the welcome wagon." Commander Zilch stepped forward, his ceremonial cape fluttering in what he probably hoped was an intimidating way but mostly looked like he was being attacked by a very fancy bedsheet. "Human Martinez speaks the truth. We have established diplomatic relations with his organization. Any interference will be considered an act of war." This was not entirely accurate, but Zilch had spent enough time in galactic politics to know that when you're confused, the best strategy is to sound confident and let everyone else figure out what's actually happening. Agent Morrison's other eye started twitching, creating a facial tick pattern that looked like Morse code for, "This was not in the training manual." "Sir, with all due respect, Mr. Martinez is a pest control operator. He's not qualified to negotiate interplanetary treaties." "That's where you're wrong," Ruth interjected, appearing at Frank's elbow with a folder that looked thick enough to be used as emergency shelter. "I've been reviewing the legal precedents, and according to both terrestrial maritime law and the 2847 Galactic Commerce Regulations, first contact protocols default to the initial negotiating party unless formally contested, within 72 standard time units." Agent Morrison stared at Ruth like she'd just announced she was personally related to the Constitution. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see your credentials." Ruth handed him a business card. "Ruth Kim, certified galactic accountant, licensed in 47 star systems, specializing in interspecies tax preparation and treaty revenue optimization." While Morrison tried to process how someone could be licensed in star systems that he was pretty sure hadn't existed an hour ago, Eddie had positioned himself near the alien ship and was having what appeared to be a very intense conversation with Beep. "So you guys monitor all the communication channels, right?" Eddie was saying, his eyes darting between Beep's various recording devices. "I mean, that's basic reconnaissance. I've been trying to tell people for years that the government's been covering up the monitoring systems, but nobody listens to the guy with the ham radio set up." Bee's whiskers were practically vibrating with excitement. "You have independent surveillance networks? That's actually quite sophisticated for a primitive species." "Primitive," Eddie laughed, the sound containing roughly equal parts vindication and caffeine withdrawal. "Buddy, I can intercept military communications from 3 states away. I've got satellite dishes that can pick up conversations from government bunkers that officially don't exist." Lieutenant Werr leaned in closer. "He's describing a comprehensive intelligence network." "That's exactly what it is," Eddie confirmed, warming to his favorite topic. "The whole thing's connected. The internet, the power grid, the cable systems, even the emergency broadcast networks. One guy with the right equipment and knowledge of the frequency patterns can monitor everything." Commander Zilch, who had been trying to follow Agent Morrison's increasingly frantic phone calls, suddenly turned his full attention to Eddie's explanation. "Human Eddie, are you saying that your species has developed a planet-wide surveillance and communication control system?" "Well, yeah," Eddie said, like this was the most obvious thing in the world. "How else do you think we'd keep track of what everyone's doing? Frank here gets service calls from all over the city. Ruth's got financial networks that apparently reach other planets now. Jenny's broadcasting our conversation to thousands of people in real time." Ginny waved from where she was narrating the government's arrival to her rapidly growing audience. 58,000 viewers and climbing. The comment section thinks this is either the best reality TV ever made or the beginning of the end times. There's a betting pool. Agent Morrison's radio crackled with increasingly urgent updates. Morrison here. Yes, sir, I understand the situation is unprecedented. No, sir, I don't know why they're only talking to the exterminator. What do you mean he's charging them for consultation fees? Frank, who had been listening to all of this while slowly realizing that his Quiet Tuesday had become something resembling a diplomatic incident, decided it was time to regain control of the conversation. All right, everyone, let's just slow down a minute, he announced, using the same voice he used to explain to customers why their ant problem was going to take more than one treatment. Commander Zilch, Agent Morrison, and whoever else is making decisions here, I think we're all getting a little carried away. He gestured toward his pest control shop. Look, I don't know anything about galactic politics or government protocols. What I do know is customer service. These folks came to me with a problem, we were working out the details, and now everyone's acting like we're negotiating world peace. We kind of are, Ruth pointed out, consulting her tablet. The economic implications alone are staggering. Conservative estimates put the value of an exclusive Earth-alien trade agreement in the trillions. And I've got 47 people in the comments asking if aliens tip, Jenny added helpfully. Commander Zilch looked around the parking lot, taking in the government agents, the news helicopters, the growing crowd of onlookers, and Frank standing in the middle of it all, wearing a polo shirt with a cartoon bug on it. Human Martinez, he said slowly, I believe your species may be more formidable than our initial intelligence suggested. Agent Morrison stepped forward, clearly trying to regain some semblance of control over the situation. Commander, I represent the official government response to extraterrestrial contact. We have proper protocols for this type of... In Morrison, Zilch interrupted, his voice taking on the tone of someone who'd just figured out which way the wind was blowing. With respect, your arrival demonstrates that Human Martinez organization has already successfully mobilized your planet's defensive forces. His strategic capabilities are clearly beyond what we initially assessed. Frank opened his mouth to explain that he had absolutely no connection to the 17 SUVs or their contents, but Ruth caught his arm and whispered urgently, Don't correct him. The negotiating position is too valuable. Eddie, meanwhile, had moved on from explaining surveillance networks to describing what he called urban survival tactics, which mostly involved knowing which bodegas stayed open late and how to navigate subway delays, but which the aliens were interpreting as advanced civilization management techniques. Jenny's livestream had attracted the attention of several news networks, who were now arriving with satellite trucks, and reporters who looked like they'd been told to prepare for either a hoax or the story of the century. And in the middle of all of this, Frank Martinez stood in a strip mall parking lot, wearing his pest control uniform, and slowly came to the realization that he was apparently now Earth's unofficial alien relations manager. This is insane, he muttered. This is Tuesday, Ruth corrected, making another note in her rapidly expanding file. And we're billing hourly. The revelation of humanity's true terrifying nature began, as most earth-shattering discoveries do, with someone needing to use the bathroom. Lieutenant Wurr, who had been standing in the parking lot for the better part of an hour listening to increasingly complex explanations of human society, made the mistake of asking where he could find their ship's equivalent of a waste disposal facility. Oh, just use the bathroom inside, Frank said, pointing toward his shop. It's right next to the supply closet. What Frank didn't think to mention, because it had never occurred to him that this information would be relevant to interplanetary relations, was that his supply closet contained his pest control equipment. More specifically, it contained his collection of specimens, jars full of the various insects and rodents he'd collected over the years for identification purposes. Lieutenant Wurr opened the wrong door. The scream that emerged from Frank's pest control shop was not entirely unlike the sound a tea kettle might make if it had been personally betrayed by gravity and was falling from a great height. It was followed by a crash, several more screams, and what sounded like someone trying to fight off an army of very small, very determined enemies. Everyone in the parking lot turned toward the sound. Frank sighed the sigh of someone whose Tuesday had already exceeded his lifetime quota of weird, and headed for his shop. "Where?" Commander Zilch called out, his voice containing the kind of concern usually reserved for missing children or misplaced nuclear weapons. "He probably just met Mr. Henderson," Frank called back over his shoulder as he pushed through the door. Inside, Lieutenant Wirt was pressed against the far wall, pointing a shaking appendage at Frank's specimen collection. His eyes, all four of them, were approximately the size of dinner plates. "What?" Wurr whispered in a voice that suggested his worldview had just been thoroughly renovated. Are those things? Frank looked where he was pointing. Oh, those? That's just my collection. Cockroaches mostly, few beetles. That big jar has some rats I caught last month at the warehouse job. Nothing fancy. Cockroaches, were repeated, like he was trying to understand a word in a language that didn't exist. Yeah, you know, standard urban pests. Survive pretty much anything, breed like crazy, eat whatever's available. They've been around for millions of years, tough little guys. Commander Zilch appeared in the doorway, took one look at Lieutenant Wer's expression, followed his gaze to the specimen jars, and made a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and the noise a balloon makes when you let the air out too fast. Human Martinez, Zilch said carefully. These creatures live on your planet. Live on it? Frank laughed. They practically run it. You can't get rid of them. Trust me, I've been trying for 15 years. Drop a nuclear bomb and cockroaches will probably survive just fine. They're like nature's backup plan. Beef chose this moment to peek around the corner, saw the specimen collection, and immediately began what Frank could only describe as having a panic attack in 3 different languages simultaneously. Commander, Beep wheezed between what sounded like alien hyperventilation. The humans, they live in symbiosis with the dread devourers. The what now? Frank asked. Eddie, who had followed the commotion inside, looked at the jars with professional interest. Oh yeah, Frank's got a great collection. You should see the size of the rats we caught in my apartment building. Thing was big enough to charge rent. This statement did not have the calming effect Frank might have hoped for. Commander Zilch backed toward the door like he was trying to escape the gravitational pull of Frank's specimen jars. Human Eddie, Zilch said in the tone of someone trying very hard not to panic. You're saying these creatures inhabit your living spaces? Well, yeah, Eddie replied cheerfully. I mean, you try to keep them out, but they always find a way in. Smart little guys. They figure out how to get around traps, find food sources, avoid the poison. It's like living with tiny criminal masterminds. And you coexist with them? Lieutenant Wer asked, his voice barely above a whisper. What choice do we have? Frank shrugged. They were here first. We just do our best to manage the population and keep them from taking over completely. Outside, Jenny's live stream had attracted the attention of someone who actually knew something about xenobiology, and the comments section was getting educational in a way that was making everyone progressively more concerned. Holy crud, you guys, Jenny was reading from her phone. Someone in the chat who says they're a graduate student at SETI just posted that most galactic civilizations consider Earth 2-type insects to be apex predators. Apparently, cockroaches are like the alien equivalent of tigers or something. Ruth, who had been monitoring the aliens' reactions with the sharp attention of someone whose hourly billing rate was getting more valuable by the minute, pulled Frank aside. Frank, she said quietly, I think they're genuinely terrified of your bug collection. That's ridiculous, Frank replied. They're aliens. They have spaceships. They travel between stars. How can they be scared of cockroaches? Maybe that's exactly why they should be scared of cockroaches, Ruth pointed out. Think about it. They've probably never encountered anything that can survive what cockroaches can survive. Meanwhile, Agent Morrison had been trying to follow the conversation from outside, but his attempts to establish official government control over the situation were being consistently undermined by the fact that the aliens kept asking Frank for his opinion on everything. Commander Zilch, Morrison tried again. As the official representative of Earth's government, I really must insist that we follow proper diplomatic protocols. Zilch interrupted, never taking his eyes off Frank. Does your government also employ these dread devourers as biological weapons? The what? No, we don't use bugs as weapons. They're just pests. Just pests, Zilch repeated, like Morrison had just casually mentioned that humans used antimatter for lawn fertilizer. Frank, beginning to grasp the scope of the misunderstanding, decided to test a theory. Hey, Commander, want to see something really impressive? Before anyone could stop him, Frank walked over to the dumpster behind his shop, lifted the lid and pointed inside. Check this out. New York City rats. These guys survive winters that would freeze most animals solid, eat garbage that would poison anything else, and navigate urban environments that would challenge most humans. A rat the size of a small cat looked up at them from where it had been enjoying what appeared to be a 3-course meal consisting of Chinese takeout leftovers, pizza crusts, and something that might once have been a sandwich. The rat looked at Frank, looked at the assembled crowd of humans and aliens, apparently decided this was none of its business, and went back to eating. Commander Zilch stared at the rat. The rat ignored Commander Zilch with the casual indifference of someone who had places to be and garbage to eat. It shows no fear, Zilch whispered. Where away would you? Frank asked. It's a New York rat. I've seen these guys stare down subway trains. Subway trains? Eddie perked up. Oh yeah, the subway system. That's where the really big ones live. Underground tunnel networks, constant food supply, climate-controlled environment. It's like we built them a luxury hotel and they moved in permanently. He was now frantically consulting his communication device, apparently trying to contact someone about what Frank could only assume was humanity's terrifying mastery of biological warfare. "Commander," Beep reported in a voice that suggested his worldview was continuing to undergo major renovations. "I'm getting reports from our scouts. The entire planet appears to be inhabited by these creatures. They're in every human settlement, every food distribution center, every transportation hub, and the humans just live with this," Lieutenant Wurr asked. "Live with it?" Frank grinned. "We've turned it into an industry. I make my living managing their population. There are thousands of people like me all over the planet." Jenny, who had been following this conversation with growing excitement, suddenly grabbed her phone. "Oh my God, you guys, I just realized. We don't just live with creatures that terrify aliens. We've domesticated creatures that terrify aliens." She pointed her camera at a stray cat that had wandered into the parking lot and was now sitting in a patch of sunlight, calmly grooming itself. "That's Mr. Whiskers from the nail salon," Frank explained. "He keeps the mouse population down." "The mouse population," Commander Zilch repeated faintly. Yeah, mice are smaller than rats, but they breed faster. Mr. Whiskers probably catches a dozen of them a week, plus the occasional bird." The cat, as if sensing that it had become the center of attention, stood up, stretched with the casual confidence of someone who owned the entire parking lot, and walked directly toward the aliens. Lieutenant Wurr made a small whimpering sound and tried to hide behind Commander Zilch, who was himself backing toward the ship. Mr. Whiskers rubbed against Frank's leg, purring like a small engine. "He likes you," Frank said to the aliens. "He's friendly." "That thing," Zilch said, pointing at the cat with a shaking finger, "is a predator." "Well, yeah," Frank agreed, "but he's our predator. We feed him, give him a warm place to sleep, and he keeps the smaller predators under control. It's a pretty good deal for everyone." The silence that followed was the kind of silence that happens when everyone present suddenly realizes they've been having completely different conversations about completely different reality. Agent Morrison, who had been trying to follow this exchange while simultaneously fielding increasingly frantic calls from his superiors, finally managed to interject. "Wait, are you telling me that the aliens are afraid of cats and cockroaches?" "Not afraid," Commander Zilch corrected with the kind of dignity that someone maintains while standing on a chair to avoid a mouse. "Respectfully cautious of species that have clearly mastered survival in hostile environments." "Hostile environments?" Frank looked around the strip mall parking lot, which was admittedly not the most beautiful place on Earth, but hardly qualified as hostile. "This is just Queens." And with that statement, Frank accidentally revealed the most terrifying thing about humanity. They considered Queens a normal place to live. 6 months later, Frank Martinez was sitting in what used to be his pest control shop and was now the unofficial Earth embassy to the galactic community, trying to explain to a delegation of concerned aliens why humans intentionally put hot sauce on food that was already spicy enough to qualify as a chemical weapon in most civilized sectors of the galaxy. "You see, ambassadors," Frank said, gesturing with a slice of pizza that had enough pepperoni on it to constitute its own ecosystem. "The capsaicin actually enhances the flavor profile while simultaneously demonstrating our species' mastery over biological warfare compounds." The 3 alien ambassadors, who belonged to species that Frank had privately nicknamed the worried jellyfish, the anxious praying mantises, and the perpetually startled ferrets, all took careful notes while maintaining what they probably thought was a respectful distance, but looked more like they were trying to stay upwind of a nuclear reactor. Ruth appeared at Frank's elbow with a tablet and the kind of smile that meant she'd just calculated something very profitable. "Frank, I've got the quarterly reports. Earth's pest management consultation contracts are up 400%, and we've got requests for biological warfare seminars from 37 different star systems." "Biological warfare seminars?" Frank asked, though at this point very little surprised him anymore. "They want to know how we develop such effective coexistence strategies with hostile fauna. Apparently most civilizations just flee to different planets when they encounter anything resembling a cockroach." Ambassador Zleep of the worried jellyfish delegation leaned forward nervously. "Consultant Martinez, our homeworld has recently been invaded by creatures that somewhat resemble your ants. Our military suggests planetary evacuation, but your success stories give us hope. Perhaps you could visit and demonstrate your species' legendary pest management techniques?" Frank looked out the window of his shop, where a line of alien ships now regularly parked between the nail salon and Dave's Chinese food place. Dave had started advertising authentic Earth cuisine as eaten by the planet's most dangerous species and was making enough money to finally replace his 20-year-old cash register. Sure, Frank said, because honestly, consulting on alien ant problems seemed relatively normal compared to the rest of his life now. Ruth handles the scheduling and interstellar travel arrangements. Fair warning, though, my methods mostly involve a lot of spraying and waiting for things to die. Ambassador Skrit of the anxious praying mantises made what Frank had learned to recognize as their species' equivalent of taking notes, frantically. Spraying and waiting for things to die, yes. This aligns with our intelligence reports about human tactical patience and chemical warfare capabilities. From the back of the shop came the sound of Eddie explaining something with great enthusiasm to what sounded like a room full of very attentive listeners. Eddie had become something of a celebrity in certain circles after his urban survival and intelligence gathering lectures started being broadcast to 6 different galactic sectors. So you establish monitoring networks in every major population center, Eddie was saying, and you use the existing infrastructure to create redundant communication systems. The key is making it look like consumer convenience technology so nobody realizes they're participating in a planet-wide surveillance grid. His audience, which Frank knew consisted of military strategists from the Galactic Defense Coalition, was eating up every word of Eddie's explanation of how humans had cleverly disguised their monitoring systems as social media platforms and internet connectivity. Jenny Walsh, meanwhile, had parlayed her First Contact livestream into the most successful podcast in 3 galactic sectors. Jenny's Interstellar Coffee Talk featured weekly interviews with alien visitors trying to understand human culture, and had somehow become required listening for xenosociology students across half the known galaxy. Her current guest was Commander Zilch, who had been demoted from his military position but had found new success as a motivational speaker, focusing on learning from failure and adapting to unexpected strategic environments. The key lesson from my encounter with the Martinez organization, Zilch was saying through the podcast equipment Jenny had somehow convinced NASA to install, is that you must never underestimate a species based on initial appearances. What we interpreted as primitive pest control was actually sophisticated biological warfare management, combined with psychological operations. Soren held up. And what's your biggest takeaway for our listeners? Jenny asked, with the professional enthusiasm of someone who had discovered that aliens tipped very well for good interviews. Never ever underestimate anyone who considers cohabitation with apex predators to be a normal Tuesday. Frank could hear the interview from his consultation area, and had to admit that Zilch had developed a pretty good understanding of humanity, even if he was still completely wrong about why. Lieutenant Wurr, who had become something of a regular visitor, poked his head through the door. Over the past 6 months, he'd gradually worked up the courage to be in the same room as Frank's specimen collection, though he still maintained what he considered a safe distance of approximately 15 feet. Consultant Martinez, Wurr said, using the title that had somehow become official despite Frank never applying for it, I have a question about the creatures you call pigeons. Frank looked up from his pizza and his notes about ant management strategies for the Zleep homeworld. What about them? Our reconnaissance teams report that these creatures have established territorial control over most of your urban centers, show no fear of much larger predators including humans, and have developed sophisticated food acquisition strategies. Are they another example of your species' biological alliance network? Frank considered this question while watching a pigeon outside his window steal someone's sandwich with the casual efficiency of a professional pickpocket. You know what, Lieutenant? Yeah, sure, let's go with that. Ruth looked up from her tablet, where she was apparently scheduling Frank for pest control consultations on 4 different planets in the next month. Frank, you realize you're accidentally responsible for Earth being classified as a Class 7 strategic asset by the galactic community, right? What does that mean? It means we're considered too dangerous to invade and too valuable to ignore. Every species in the galaxy wants to hire us for jobs that involve anything they consider scary, and nobody wants to make us angry enough to visit their homeworld with our biological warfare specialists. Frank looked around his shop, which now contained alien communication equipment, interstellar travel booking systems, a coffee machine that had been a diplomatic gift from the Tau Ceti Trade Federation, and a persistent colony of cockroaches that had become something of a tourist attraction for visiting aliens who wanted to observe Earth's domesticated apex predators in their natural habitat. Beep, who had been promoted to Chief Communications Officer for the Galactic Superiority Fleet after being credited with discovering the most strategically important species in known space, appeared in the doorway with his usual collection of recording devices. Consultant Martinez, Beep said, his whiskers twitching with what Frank had learned to recognize as excitement. "We've received a priority communication from the Andromeda Trade Collective. They're offering a exclusive contract for human pest management services. Apparently they have a situation with creatures they describe as small, fast, numerous, and completely without fear." "Sounds like mice," Frank said. "They're offering payment equivalent to the gross domestic product of a small solar system," Ruth added, which got Frank's attention considerably more than the tactical implications. Frank Martinez, who 6 months ago had been a guy from Queens who sprayed bugs for a living, looked around his accidental embassy, considered his options, and made the kind of decision that had apparently made his entire species legendary across the galaxy. "Beep, tell them we'll take the job," he said. "But I'm gonna need a bigger spray bottle." Outside, Mr. Whiskers stretched in his patch of sunlight, completely unaware that he had become the galaxy's most feared biological weapon. A pigeon landed nearby and began pecking at crumbs with the casual indifference that had convinced 3 different alien civilizations that Earth's fauna possessed supernatural confidence. And in the strip mall next to the nail salon and Dave's Chinese food place, humanity's accidental ambassador to the stars finished his pizza, grabbed his pest control equipment, and prepared for another perfectly normal day of terrifying the galaxy with the radical concept of coexisting with creatures that weren't afraid of anything. Stagnation. Agent Morrison, who had eventually been assigned as the official government liaison to what had become known as the Martinez Diplomatic Initiative, walked past the window carrying a folder labeled Weekly Report on Humanity's Accidental Reputation as Galactic Apex Predators, and muttering something about how none of this had been covered in his training. The universe, as it turned out, was a lot more interesting when you approached it with the attitude of a guy from Queens who just wanted to get through his Tuesday without too much drama, even if that Tuesday now involved interstellar travel and consulting on alien pest problems. But hey, Frank figured, at least the pay was good.